And hello again from WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. I'm Josh Manning, Deputy Managing Editor for Assignment at the Western Journal. Joining me today, Joe Sutton on my left, Deputy Managing Editor in charge of Story, and Deborah Van Kempen, Editor.
Yes.
At-large editor?
No, just
editor, just plain editor. Story editor, associate story editor.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us today. We've got a number of topics to talk with you about today. Just right off the top, we're going to address this a little bit later. Right off the top, we want to send our condolences to Catherine Limbaugh and Rush Limbaugh's family and extended family through his radio program. We were devastated to hear this morning that he had passed away. He'd been battling cancer for a long time. We're going to talk a little bit more about Rush and his legacy a little bit later on in the show, but right off the top, we wanted to pay our respects to him. He will be missed, and the conservative landscape won't be the same without him. And Rush was full of thoughts on President Trump. He was full of thoughts on Mitch McConnell.
Yes, he
was. And he had interesting thoughts on both of those people. And Joe, you've got a story for us involving them.
Yeah. So as you may know, President Trump was acquitted in his Senate impeachment trial on Saturday, and then Mitch McConnell actually voted to acquit former President Trump. Right after his vote to acquit, McConnell gave a fiery speech in which he basically said that Trump was responsible for the January 6th Capitol incursion. He slammed Trump. He suggested that the former president could face legal, non-impeachment related consequences for what he claimed was his responsibility in terms of that. Now, skip ahead a couple of days. On Tuesday, President Trump releases a very, very, very Trump-like statement, and I will just read a little bit from it. He says, "The Republican Party can never again be respected or strong with political leaders like Senator Mitch McConnell at its helm. McConnell's dedication to business as usual, status quo policies, together with his lack of political insight, wisdom, skill, and personality, has rapidly driven him from majority leader to minority leader, and it will only get worse. The Democrats and Chuck Schumer play McConnell like a fiddle. They've never had it so good, and they want to keep it that way. We know our America First agenda is a winner, not McConnell's Beltway First agenda or Biden's America Last. Now, the reason why this is so noteworthy is because Trump and McConnell really did get along over Trump's 4 years. They accomplished a lot of things together, whether you want to talk about tax reform, almost repealing Obamacare, record numbers of federal judges on the judiciary bench, and including 3 Supreme Court justices. So they got along, and now they seem to have broken. And what I kind of want to ask you guys is, do you agree with Trump? Is McConnell an ineffective leader? Is he all of the things that Trump says he is? Do you think he has any points here, any valid points?
I have mixed feelings about McConnell. I think that in the past, he did some great work during the Obama administration. I think that he was effective in many ways during that time. But I think that, and, in the first few years in the Trump presidency, like you were saying, like they did seem to work well together. But I think that over the past few years, he has... I think the Republican Party is shifting, and McConnell is not willing to shift with it. And I think that that right there might be the reason why he will not be a good fit for the party moving forward.
But as recently as October, September, wasn't he, getting Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court? He was still accomplishing and driving parts of President Trump's agenda, right?
Yes, definitely. I think what I'm more referring to is just his overall attitude toward what happened with the election and his attitude toward Trump following that. I think that there were a lot of people that had very significant and real concerns about what happened in the election, and just McConnell's general attitude was not very... I think to me it kind of showed that he didn't really understand what the will of the people was.
That's an interesting thought. I don't know if that's... I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure what to think about that. What I do know is that McConnell's a masterful politician. Yes. I mean, the guy absolutely knows the Senate inside and out. He knows how to get things done. That's how they... rammed through. He was a fantastic majority leader. Yeah, that's how they rammed through all of those federal judges, which Trump, there are going to be a lot of things in Trump's legacy that may be the most consequential for the country over the long haul. But, when you're a good politician, you can also tell which way the wind's blowing. I think probably by November 4th, 5th, 6th, McConnell was probably saying, oh, okay, this is likely the end of the Trump administration, and it's time to recalibrate and make course adjustments to make sure he McConnell can survive in the in the new world. So I would guess that's what some of this is. I think a lot of what McConnell, there have been some negative things he said about Trump. I think he's probably felt those things since the beginning about Trump, and maybe wasn't as free to
but he knew he could
say them.
Use Trump to get his agenda accomplished, which is perfectly fine.
That's politics.
Yeah, that's how it works.
That's politics. Whether or not there's a sentiment right now amongst Republicans, and I think amongst a whole lot of Trump supporters, that McConnell has betrayed them. And it's just not clear to me that that's true. If Trump were still in office and McConnell were trying to undercut him and sabotage him, that would be one thing. McConnell needs to remain viable in D.C. He sees taking a couple of shots.
To remain viable. And he's
viable. This is true. This is true. And there's not. I mean, while Trump was in office, you had somebody who was a really powerful figurehead, had an amazing bully pulpit through Twitter and everything else, and could run and cover. Now McConnell's the one. He is the most senior Republican out there, and I think he's trying to figure out how to calibrate his responses so that he can work with, so that he can still get things done for Republicans. Yeah, that'd be my guess.
Now I want to move on to our next segment pretty quickly, but I do want to ask one more question. Do you think that establishment leaders like Mitch McConnell are a net negative or a net positive, or have they been a net negative or a net positive for the conservative, the liberty movement, the freedom movement?
How would you said establishment?
Yeah, I mean, I guess
Can you
he's
expound
talking
on that
specifically
just a
about McConnell.
touch?
Let me just make it more specific. Has Mitch McConnell been a net negative or a net positive for liberty and for the the movement that conservatives, libertarians like myself care about?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. He has done very good. So there's a broader question involved here. Are Republicans, as they exist right now, are they doing very much for the cause of liberty? I'm not completely sure about that. The Supreme Court has made some good moves as far as the First Amendment goes lately,
and the Second Amendment,
and the Second Amendment,
tax reform.
But Republicans, and this is kind of the sentiment that led to Trump, Republicans increasingly look like they are there to feather their own nests and to protect the interest of big business. And that in the interests of big business don't necessarily coincide with freedom.
Sometimes they do.
Sometimes they do.
Sometimes they do.
But they don't. Well, they do when they're when business is forced to, when the market's completely open. But a lot of times, what businesses are interested in doing, is getting favors from the government,
which is very bad.
Right. Exactly. So I'm not sure. I mean, it's very difficult out there right now. You've then got libertarian candidates who say, "Hey, look, put us in office. We want to destroy all of it. We want to bring liberty back." But it's very hard to get them in. I think it's kind of hard to say, "Hey, vote for me. I promise you, I'll do nothing when I get there." That's a hard campaign promise. So I don't know. I guess put on the spot, I would say McConnell's done more good than bad. There was a lot of bad he could do. There's an enormous amount of bad you can do when you're up there. And he's done a number of very good things. Yeah. But like anybody else, he's human. He has an ego. He's got an area he wants to protect, his own little fiefdom, and he's behaving as we would expect him to behave.
That's true. Deborah, how about you? In 30 seconds or less, net negative, net positive.
I think in the past I would say that he's been a net positive for the party, but I think moving forward, I think that there are a lot of new factors that have kind of come up in the party, and I think that in that sense he may have to consider what the will of the people is moving forward and what he is hoping to have happen, just in terms of. let me rephrase. I think that moving forward, he will have to kind of reconsider a few things with a party that overwhelmingly is still very, very supportive of Trump.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We're
That's a
gonna
good
move
point.
on to our next
Yeah,
segment.
so we kicked off the, well, we didn't kick off. We started the podcast wishing condolences to the Limbaugh family and his radio family. We want to talk about Rush here for just a little while. It's probably the news story of the day, and it's not tragic. Rush led an incredible life, a very full life, a very giving life. Most people don't know all the things he did for other people and for his family. It was a life well lived. And we're diminished for his not being here. We're lessened because he's not here anymore. I saw a friend post on Facebook a couple of hours ago talking about how some people on Twitter were talking about, I guess he's bit the dust finally. And
Many worse things were said.
Her
about
response,
that,
yeah, and we've got some of those. But her response is, well, I don't know so much about bitten the dust as he is kicking up gold dust in glory. He did profess to have a relationship with Christ. That is a wonderful and comforting thing to all of us. We want to take a few minutes just to remember him. I'll tell you what. First off, before we do that, let's lead in on kind of a rougher note, too. The internet has been abuzz today with people coming out and talking about Rush, and a lot of people have said some very nice things, but there's an enormous number of people who have been absolutely hateful with it, and I want to warn you as we go into some of these tweets that they're a little bit rough, and I also want to remind you that presumably these are coming from tolerant liberals. This is what liberal tolerance looks like. We've got 4 or 5 of these. Logan, can we run the first one, please? So Ted Cruz posted his thoughts and prayers and well wishes, and one of the people responding to it said, "I wouldn't be so sad if you were next in line either." In other words, I'm glad Rush died, and hey, Ted Cruz, it'd be great if you're next. It's a tolerant, lovable liberal. Next up, Logan. Happy Death Day, Rush. Props to cancer. It really pulled through for us. The level of hate is just truly remarkable. I mean, this is somebody who hasn't done anything to whoever Mrs. James T. Kirk is. Redheaded Fury. Well, that's matches that. I mean, where's the hate coming from?
Well, look, I think all you need to know is look at, I already talked about Amy Coney Barrett. Look back then when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, right? She's a liberal icon, right? As liberal as it gets. Yeah. And yet I was on Twitter a good amount of that day, and I was on social media, and conservatives were saying with very, very, very few exceptions, what a wonderful life that woman lived. I hope she rests in peace. We pray for her family. President Trump was legitimately shocked and really saddened when he heard about it for the first time. What does it say about just the difference between, I hate both sides, and what about, but what does it say about the difference between the one side, you have the left who jumps, every time a conservative dies, they jump on it and they make inappropriate, despicable remarks. And when a liberal person dies, conservatives respond in love and with prayers and with thoughts and with condolences. What does that say?
I think it just speaks to the difference in morality between the two parties. I think that conservatives on the whole are just a lot more gracious, and they want to be sure that their actions are reflective of a higher morality. And many conservatives are Christians, and I think that we want to express the sadness that it is when people don't come to Christ before they die, or the sadness that it is even when people do die and they leave behind loved ones. And I think that is just that's a sentiment that's not common between conservatives and liberals a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people know they answer to someone higher. So when they're writing this stuff, they're not writing down, "Wow, we hope you rot in hell," or despicable things like that. They know they're answering to someone who is watching what they're doing and who wants them to love.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Joe and I were talking earlier today about this idea that Jordan Peterson talks about from time to time, and he got it from Carl Jung, this idea that people don't have ideas. Ideas have people. And so you better be very careful what ideas you're letting into your life, because if you're not careful, they're going to be operating you. You're not going to be operating them. They'll be operating you like a puppet.
Right.
And as I looked at the responses, run the next one there, Logan, the one you've got queued up. I can see over here. I'm praying to Baphomet to cancel out your prayer. If you don't know that, that's the Baphomet. That's the statue that Satanists like to put up in state capitals and rival Ten Commandment monuments with, and those things. I think what has happened with a whole lot of these folks on the left is the idea of leftism has possessed them. They're no longer in control of the idea. The idea is in control of them, and animus has taken them over. And as we know, anything that stands in the way of leftism to the left is evil, is to be destroyed.
Even decency.
Decency, because anything standing in the way of the left presumably is standing in the way of utopia. That's the idea, that eventually, if leftists got their way, they believed that you would usher in the new socialist man, the new Soviet man, and utopia would descend. And so somebody like Rush, who gets in the way of that, is then evil. He's standing between humanity and salvation. And I don't even know if these people realize what they're doing at this point, because they are so animus possessed. There are just not a lot of people out there you meet on the street who would say that.
No, but
Right.
if
To
you
your
don't-
face.
if you say it behind Twitter, then-
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's important to note also, we aren't just cherry picking some random tweets. We took 5 that we could find because that's all that we could find. This stuff was trending on Twitter.
Yeah.
Well,
this was widespread.
Hey, Logan, not the next one, but the next one. Can you bring that one in? The JPEG I sent you? If we have it, I want to show you this. Let's put that up there. So Joe's exactly right. One thing I noticed was trending after all of this started was hashtag Satan. Hashtag Satan. And why was that trending? Because people were likening Trump to Satan. That there's no rational explanation for that. This is a guy who raised millions and millions and millions of dollars to fight lymphoma. This is a guy who raised and gave millions of dollars to the was it the National Law Enforcement Fund? I can't recall. It's a charity like that.
You saying Trump or Limbaugh?
I'm sorry, Limbaugh.
Okay.
Pardon me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're good.
This is somebody who sent his private plane to help kids who needed it. This is somebody who would pack the plane with presents and send them back to all of his family in Missouri. I mean, this is a guy who
Waitstaff $5,000.
Yeah, when he was going to be awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the highest honor a civilian can get. He couldn't use his plane. His niece was using it for her class trip to D.C. His own private plane he couldn't use. He had lent it out so some kids could go to D.C. on a school trip. This is a great guy. There's no explanation for this except an animated hatred of him. Now, one of the questions is, why do they hate him so much? And I want to hear what you think about this, Deborah. I want Joe to set it off, though, because Joe mentioned something earlier, an observation about Trump that I had never thought of before, that I thought was about Limbaugh, Rush, that I had never thought before.
Well, look, a lot of leftists are going after some controversial comments that Rush Limbaugh has made in his past. And look, if you are on the radio for 30 some odd years, every weekday, you're going to say some things that people aren't going to like. You're going to say some controversial things. You might even say some things that you end up regretting. But to me, the person who Rush Limbaugh reminds me of, who I think is very famous and even liked by a lot of leftists right now, is Dave Chappelle. He's my favorite comedian. And he's someone who says politically incorrect things, right? Mm-hmm. Dave Chappelle makes fun of gay people. He makes fun of transgender people, black people, every race you can possibly imagine, Asian people, literally everything under the sun he makes fun of. And he does it because, look, comedy is important. Free speech is important. It's important to be able to poke fun at certain things. This is America, and it's really, really important that we not have to take ourselves seriously sometimes. And I think what people are losing sight of when they criticize Rush Limbaugh for comments he made about gay people or for various things that he said that, look, I think, maybe he shouldn't have said them, but what they're losing is that there's a comedy aspect. And it's the value of being an entertainer and saying things that, don't take him too seriously. Stop taking yourself so seriously. He is making a wider point by being funny, and he was funny. Yeah. This was a man with incredible wit and wisdom, and he was able to use his comedy and his sense of wit to say great things, just to make insightful points about America and about the world. And Dave Chappelle does that as well. And you just have to realize there's a sense of comedy there, a sense of entertainer, and using that to make grander points.
Yeah, but that's the thing, though, is that if you are a comedian now, you have to be politically correct to be funny. Correct. If you do anything that is outside of those lines, you're canceled. There's no longer any value in your entertainment.
Josh Limbaugh was canceled years ago.
Right, exactly. And I think that one of the reasons why he is such an icon in the media world is because he was somebody that stood up to that culture and said, I'm not going to do that. I don't care what you guys think. I'm going to say it how it is. Yeah.
And look, Rush Limbaugh was not a racist. He was not a homophobe. He was not a transphobe. He was a guy who made some jokes sometimes. And
jokes with a point, which is what Dave Chappelle does. Yeah. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you guys, I wrote down earlier, and then I realized you actually had kind of answered it with what you were talking about a second ago. I was going to ask, why is it that the left hated him so much? And I think your analysis really exposes it. He was so funny. And almost nothing can stand in front of humor. When Rush passed today, I lost a hero. I've had 3 heroes in my life. I've lost 2 of them now. One of the other ones was my old pastor, Adrian Rogers. And he used to say, once you have laughed at something, you can never take it quite as seriously again. That's a really good insight. And Rush was brilliant at taking the arrogance, the pomp, the bombast of the left and turning it on them and showing it for the fraud that it was, and how ultimately vacuous and empty it was, and how there's nothing underneath it except really a hatred of America and competence and freedom. And I think that's why the left really hated him so much. It's really hard to fight a comedian.
Yeah. It's impossible because comedy's different. Comedy just hits different, and you can't fight you can't fight comedy without looking like you take yourself way too seriously and are pompous and ridiculous.
Right.
Yeah, and that's why the left dominates comedy today.
But
dominates
they're not funny.
It, whether it's sitcoms. I absolutely loved David Letterman in the early years, and Dave was always a liberal. You can say he got more liberal. I don't know that he did. He got more conventional. But I won't even watch The Late Show now with Colbert. I have no interest in that whatsoever. The left dominates all of comedy. Rush was the one who had figured out how to connect. Yeah. And I'm curious what you guys think. I think the reason he worked was just because he had the guts to do it. I don't think anybody else has the guts to. And that's what's missing from all of this. Rush was just willing to say, well, look, you got a problem with it, so what?
Yeah. And I think he was willing to say that stuff, and he wasn't saying it just to say it.
It was never shocking.
Say
it was
to
never,
make a big statement like you see on Twitter a lot of the times, or Facebook or whatever. People just saying stuff to say the most bombastic thing they can. He was saying it because he was smart and because he had a point to make, and because he believed what he was fighting for. He believed in it. He wasn't a grifter.
Yeah, no, he was. That's from somebody who thinks everyone is a grifter. Rush Limbaugh. I
do not think he was.
He was actually pretty pure as far you knew exactly where he was. A few years ago, a biography on Rush came out by, I think his name was Zev Chafetz. You can look it up on Amazon. It is a fantastic read. I think it's only 200 or 300 pages. It's been a long time since I read it. My mom has it somewhere now. I'll never see it again. But Chafetz in that book talked about how Rush primarily is an entertainer. And Rush never ventured away from that. Rush always knew when he sat down behind what he called the golden EIB mic in the Attila the Hun chair high atop the EIB building in Midtown Manhattan, he knew he was doing a show that was designed to entertain.
Yeah.
Politics was the field he was plying his trade in. that was the background for it, but it was always about entertainment.
Right.
And maybe that's what was so compelling about him, that he wasn't sitting there preaching to people. He was sitting there making people laugh.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I noticed the most when I was reading all of those tweets and just like the awful things that people were saying, they all just sound very defensive. Like they were almost scared that this man, or well, some of them seemed kind of relieved that he had passed away, because now they get to have their mantle of comedy back, supposedly. Now
Go ahead. Sorry.
And he was a person that wasn't afraid to say what he did, and he also said it from the spotlight. A lot of these people would never have the courage or the confidence to be able to go onto a public show and say what he did, or say their side of the events.
He and I mentioned Adrian Rogers a minute ago. He's my old pastor. Rush and Adrian were probably the two people from whom I learned never, ever back down. Mm-hmm. Do not compromise. Always hold the line. Always fight for what's important.
Yeah.
And Rush was simply, he was not going to compromise. Like it or not, you can take him or leave him, but he was not going to compromise what he saw as the truth. And that inspired, there's no telling how many people that inspired. Were you and I talking about Breitbart earlier?
I think we were. Andrew Breitbart, yeah.
Yeah, we are all, there's an old phrase, we're all children of the Enlightenment. Well, yeah, whatever that means. So many conservatives who sit in positions like this, we're all children or grandchildren of Rush Limbaugh in some way.
Yeah, I mean, the conservative commentator movement would not exist.
Yeah, it didn't exist. It didn't exist.
I don't think it's a hyperbole to say the Western Journal would not exist today without Rush Limbaugh. Mm-hmm. All of what we have, right? What we have to fight against the left and to fight against the mainstream media, the mainstream establishment, leftist media, it's partly because of Rush, because he did it first.
Yeah.
1988, I think, was when he started his show. And he did it until this year. And he just influenced such a massive wave of important intellectual minds of people who cared and saw, Rush can do it, I can do it too. Yeah. This worked for Rush, maybe I can learn some things from him. And that's why the conservative movement, I think, is partly where it is at today.
It's a funny thing. He went to, if I recall, he went to college, I think dropped out before the first year was over. Much to the chagrin of his parents, who were, or his dad at least, who were, upstanding citizens in Cape Girardeau, and they were attorneys and judges, and he wanted to go into broadcasting, and I think people dismissed him as just a joke. He's just he's a glorified disc jockey. He's a guy out there who's got a clown show on the radio. He's Howard Stern. He's the Howard Stern of politics or whatever. But if you go look at Rush's reading list, it is remarkable what's in there. There's some weighty pieces in there. The guy was incredibly well read, and one of the most articulate human beings in the last century. So a couple of quick questions here. First off, over the last, say, 40 years, you said 1988, over the last 30, 40 years, has there been a conservative who's been more influential than Rush?
I don't believe who's been more influential. I think that he was a pioneer in his field, and he was a person that really inspired other people to kind of step into the same type of role. So I don't believe that he is able to be replaced. I believe that he was one of a kind, and like Trump said, very, very unique. And I
agree. I think that, look, the most influential conservatives, I think, of all time are probably Barry Goldwater, William F. Buckley, Ronald Reagan, but those are all before that time period that you're mentioning. If you're going between the last 40 years and right now, you could maybe say Rupert Murdoch for having launched Fox News, but that's kind of a different ball game. That's more on the business side of things. If you're saying conservative figureheads, people who represented the conservative movement, thought, there wasn't anyone like him.
Yeah, and would Rupert have even jumped in if Rush hadn't shown? Because AM radio was dying. It was a wasteland. He single-handedly reinvigorated it. It is so funny if you look back at what was happening in the early 90s. Rush went national in 88, if I remember correctly, and then he ended up on 600 stations. And in the early 90s, you see the NBC launches news radio, which is a sitcom based on an AM radio station. That would have been unthinkable. I mean, even WKRP, I think, was FM, 20 years earlier. They launched Frasier, which again is a radio it's a show based on a radio show. Rush single-handedly changed an entire medium, and I think did give rise to all of these things. So quick question, then we want to move on to Deborah here. Anybody to take up the mantle? Is there anybody who can do it?
I think there are a few people that have sort of risen to prominence. We have Ben Shapiro, Candace Owens, we have Steven Crowder, and people like this who are kind of working in the same medium. But I don't know if anyone will be able to kind of fully step into that same role that he had.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to agree. I think there's many conservatives out there who have great things to say, and they're using their platforms in good ways, but they're not Rush, and no one probably ever will be.
Yeah, I agree with that. Tucker is one who I had thought of. I don't think he can take up the mantle, but he can. Well, he might be able. He can't replace Rush. Maybe he could take up the mantle, but he's not as funny. Crowder, I had not thought of. That's interesting because Steven is very funny.
Yeah.
Very funny. He is able to poke fun at the left.
I don't think he has the mainstream appeal that Rush had.
He
Not
doesn't.
quite.
Maybe not yet. He's very young. He's still
He
young
does.
guy.
He's still very young. He's in a super contained medium, which is digital news and Facebook and YouTube and those things. AM has the advantage of reaching to everybody who's got a radio.
Maybe
on.
Joe Rogan. To an extent.
That's an interesting thought.
He's not a conservative. He's a
great interviewer.
Yeah.
He's a great interviewer. Crowder's a really cool thought. I had not thought of him. And on that note, let's throw it to Deborah. Sorry we took up so much time. You've got time though. Go.
Great
Take
topic.
your time.
Great topic to take time on. So just let me get a second here. So the Biden administration has been kind of skirting around some issues in the past few days. Just recently, we saw them skirting around the issue of using taxpayer dollars to fund abortions in the new COVID relief bill. A reporter approached, or a reporter asked Jen Psaki during a news conference if the administration would be willing to guarantee that they wouldn't use taxpayer dollars to fund abortions. And Psaki could not give a straight answer. She said...
We'll just circle back on that.
Yeah, exactly. She said 3/4 of the public supported the plan, which should answer the reporter's question.
Oh, coward, you coward.
Exactly.
Sorry, keep going.
Go ahead.
It's what was the grift you used to describe it earlier, Joe?
Don't want to say that you can't do. You don't want to say that you're going to do something, so you just ignore the question grift.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Well, that's a very popular one with liberals. That has been for decades.
It is. So my questions to you, and I'll start with you, Josh, and then kick it over to Joe. With the rescinding of the Mexico City policy, and Biden clearly does not support the Hyde Amendment, do you think the Biden administration is going to continue to promote legislation that attacks the unborn and really spits in the faces of people who would love to not have their taxpayer dollars go towards such an important practice?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, he was he supported the Hyde Amendment until he didn't, but that was a very long time. I think that signaled a willingness to just kind of throw all of it away. I mean, he has had to decide. He's had to decide whether he's all in with the left or not. And I think the moment he got the nomination, or 5 minutes after that, he decided, all right, I am all in with the left. I don't actually think Biden is probably as leftist as he's going to end up governing.
Right.
I think he's probably going to be pulled in that direction by the Congress and probably by the media. I remember Bill Clinton in it was in 93 or 94, he made a comment to a reporter that the Congress had pulled him so far left he didn't know which way he was going. And Bill Clinton's probably a tougher guy than Joe Biden. Well, I don't know if Bill Clinton ever faced Corn Pop. Corn Pop was a tough dude, but I think he's probably a lot tougher than Biden was, or Biden is. So I would guess he doesn't care anymore, and he has also had to deal with this with the Catholic Church for a long time.
Yeah.
So I imagine there's no.
As a supposedly devout Catholic, he has made some pretty questionable policy judgments.
Yeah, and he's to do that. I think you have to decide. Okay, I've made my peace with this. I'm going to support killing children.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think that the Biden administration is going to do everything they can to push this through and hope nobody notices, right? That's why they won't answer the question, really. I think it's really funny that they say, 3/4 of the public supports this, when I'm pretty sure, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but polling shows the majority of Americans are not in favor of taxpayer funding for abortion.
Yeah.
And I think third, the thing that kind of renders this moot, unfortunately, is that money is fungible, which means that, like it or not, and I don't like it, taxpayer money already is going to fund abortion because it's going toward abortion providers.
Right.
And the money that goes toward the abortion providers, technically it's not used for abortion, but that just means they can move around other money to use it for abortion. So it's unfortunate, but of course they're going to try to get rid of the Hyde Amendment. Will that mean a whole lot practically in terms of the number of babies aborted? I don't know. I think the Hyde Amendment's a good thing in theory. In practice, I don't think it does what we think it does.
So a theological question then. How do you think, this popped into my head as you were talking about that, it seems to me that it would be nice if we at least said,
Yes.
hey, we don't want taxpayer money going to abortion. Even if we're hypocrites about it, it seems like it would be nice to at least have that on the books.
Oh, yeah.
But you're right, money's fungible. It doesn't ultimately make a difference.
Yeah. Well,
Which is worse, to not worry about it, just say we're not going to have a law and they can fund whatever they want, or to have a law and it not be obeyed? Which is worse?
I think not having the law is actually worse, which is why I support the Hyde Amendment, because it's just more direct and more gross. It's more kind of just outright, we don't care.
It's just very blatant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would agree with Joe on that point. I think that at some point we're going to look back on this and we're going to realize that we were responsible for killing millions and billions of babies, and that absolutely that the people that were standing up for it were not able to get that into the minds of all the people that were in support of it. And, Joe, you kind of mentioned something that I thought was interesting. It's all in the way that it's packaged. There's kind of been this sneaky legislation that has been popping up. And we actually also did a story, I think it was today, just talking about how Joe may be going on another executive order rampage and signing one to restrict Second Amendment rights. And so do we think that they are going to continue to do this with more issues, not just abortion?
They're going to try. Joe has basically admitted, and he's been on an executive order, let's say, spree since he was sworn into office. But he even admitted before he took office, look, I can only do so much via executive order because it can be either taken away by the next president, or the courts are going to bat it down. And look, the courts, say what you will about the federal judiciary, but it has been pretty good for the Second Amendment in recent years. So I think he's going to try, but in effect, there's not a whole lot he can do without Congress in curtailing our Second Amendment rights.
Yeah, that is a good point.
He went into this too thinking he was going to have a bigger advantage legislatively than he has, and so I'm sure the pen was kind of a backup plan, and now that's what they're stuck with.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Joe. That's going to do it for us today. Thank you for joining us on WJ Live. We are powered by the Western Journal. Be sure, if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to click subscribe. Once you hit it, you'll also be able to click that little bell off to the right. I think it's on the right. And once you do that, you'll get notified every time we go live. That's basically going to keep us from being shadow banned from you. Additionally, if you want to further support the Western Journal and the important work that we do, we are out there uncovering the truth, looking for the truth in a world where it's increasingly difficult to find. If you'd like to join us in that fight, go to westernjournal.com/join, westernjournal.com/join. There are several options there for you to partner with us. We are thankful for every person who just watches the show. We're thankful for every person who reads the articles. We're also thankful for those of you who feel moved to support us in other ways. Thank you very much. We are here every Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. We're going to see you tomorrow. Thanks, and have a nice night.
I think everybody agrees poverty is not a good thing. But if you put somebody in charge of it, they suddenly have a perverse incentive to make sure there's as much of it as possible. right? That makes
Yeah.
them more important. It gives them more authority, more power. They can hire more people, get a bigger budget, whatever. So suddenly they have an incentive to either put more people into poverty or expand the definition of poverty so that more people fall into that bucket.